How are you? This is presented for youth to understand. Shalom, meaning peace, giving honor and praise to the Creator of heaven and earth, the Most High. We want to expound in part with Black history in relation to what is now called the United States. This is not to disavow, but rather include our people from the West Indies. The majority of the people taken during what is called the Atlantic slave trade were brought to the West Indies, South America, and North America. Now, in this particular presentation, brothers and sisters, I'm going to be citing different sources for edification purposes. I want to state that I am not saying that there were Black people only here due to the Atlantic slave trade. What I am saying is that the majority came over to the Western Hemisphere as such. Okay, so that's something I want to point out for edification purposes. The majority and the bulk of Black people on the earth is in the continent of Africa, and it has always been within the continent of Africa, though you find Black people in different parts of the world, all right, such as Malaysia, such as Germany, all right. So let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. The slave ship matter. The slave ship had two decks. The average number packed in them was 200 to 400 and was shipped to the Western Hemisphere. A European named Alexander Falconbridge in the 18th century spoke of the matter as follows: some wet and blowing weather, having occasioned the portholes to be shut and the grating to be covered, fluxes and fevers among the Negroes ensued. Now, a fever, unfortunately, I do want to state that is the body's way of getting hot so that way it can try to fight off an infection. So when you have people cramped together and they're nude and they've unwashed and so forth and so on, you have diseases being passed on from one person to the next. All right. Now, when you read and see here about the flux, that's an actual bodily discharge that came out from one's genitalia. All right. The leader named John Hawkins never came to what is now called the United States. He traded Black people as slaves in Dominican Republic and Venezuela. So, brothers and sisters, what we want to point out for edification purposes is that John Hawkins was a slave trader in the 16th century. All right. So you may want to look up these particular names to try to find out exactly what's being spoken of. Now, looking at the map, brothers and sisters, on the right-hand side, you have in the red there, British North America, then Spanish America, then British Caribbean. Now, if you notice, British Caribbean in the blue is a larger quantity for people being shipped there as slaves than British North America. All right? Danish Caribbean, French Caribbean, Dutch Caribbean, and Brazil. Brazil was mainly operated by the people who were the Portuguese. All right? As pointed out in other presentations, the Portuguese and the Dutch would sometimes war with each other concerning the control of the slave trade. All right? So this is something we just want to point out for edification purposes. We want to show how it went down so that way people won't be under the guise of thinking that the Black man in North America is separated some way, shape, form, or fashion from the Black people in the other parts of the Western Hemisphere. Next slide, please. The matter of what is now the United States. The United States of America was coined in the 18th century. During the time when the Constitution was made, the matter of slavery existed before such time. The slave ship recorded in 1526 by Vasquez alone to what is now South or North Carolina is the first recorded coming to what is now the U.S. or the United States. All right, so this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right, that in 1526, some scholars say South Carolina, some scholars state what became North Carolina is where the first slave ship going to the Western Hemisphere, aka now the United States in particular, was going to. All right, you may want to look that up for edification purposes. Florida, which is the Spanish word meaning flower, was a slaveholding place since the era of 1565, and it was never a colony. Florida was gained by the government of the United States in 1819 and became a state in 1845. Brothers and sisters, the people of Spain, the Spaniards, ruled over what's called Florida, all right, ever since the 1500s. So Ponce de Leon, correct me if I'm wrong, is the one who is said to found Florida, all right? So this is something we just want to point out for edification purposes. All right, Florida became a state in 1845. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter of the United States, part 2. The last recorded slave ship to what is now the United States was in 1859. Some people say it was 1860. And it was called Clotilda, and it went to what is now South Carolina. That, like many other slave ships, were burnt. We must understand that vomit, feces, urine, and death existed on the slave ships. An account left by Oluda Equiano who was of the Igbo people, and he spoke of his matter as a captive on the slave ship being made to eat by force. Now, I want to emphasize on that last part of that PowerPoint because when you go into the record and the narrative of Oluda Equiano, who winded up eventually learning how to speak English, all right, he left an account about what happened with him on the slave ship, how he was captured, and where he was shipped off to. You understand? So, in his speech, he spoke about how the people were being made to force to eat because they didn't want to eat, because they preferred death, or that is to say, to commit suicide than to eat. So the Europeans would break the teeth of the people who were captives in order to force food down their system. All right? You had it to where they had a crane kind of thing where they would keep one's mouth open so that way they can force food to go down here. So the treatment of our ancestors on the slave ships was not something nice. All right? Next slide. The matter with the United States, part 3. The colonies existed before the states. New York became a colony in 1664. It was called New Amsterdam at that time. The Dutch had blacks as slaves from Brazil to New York, shipping back and forth. The time in which New York became a colony, it was still held as a slaveholding place, but under the British. What am I pointing out there? That the place called New York, brothers and sisters, okay, was first operated by the Dutch as a slaveholding place. When the people who were the British, later on known as the English, came into power in New York, all they did was just inherit the slaves that the Dutch had. All right? There were many black people shipped by Europeans as slaves in the 1640s between what is Barbados and what is Massachusetts. So when I'm speaking in regards in the beginning of this by showing about our ancestors in the West Indies, I am showing about how it was not disconnected from the black people in the United States. This is the raw history that we want to sit there and talk about. All right? And I say this in no disrespect. I'm not coming with a meme. I'm not coming with something that's not verifiable in history. These things can be researched. Virginia receiving the 20 slaves in 1619 was when Virginia was a colony after 1607. Yet we know slavery existed there before that time. All right, so when you read about the Dutch men of war and John Wolfe in the 17th century about the aspect of receiving 20 slaves in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia. That was recorded under the British. Yet we already know that what became the states was already the colonies, which are already operated in slavery. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right. Now, Virginia has a place, a highway that is called Jefferson Davis Way. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. They are honoring slavery in these kinds of names. All right. So you cannot erase that history off the United States. Next slide. The matter of the United States, part 4. We want to explain that John Punch was made a permanent slave in the 1640s. So since the matter with A. Johnson, that's to say Anthony Johnson, is from the 1650s, we can't say that he was the pioneer of American slavery. Now, I actually did a whole video concerning this kind of meme that we see here. This particular man is more so not in the 1600s, but in the 1800s by the name Lewis Hayden, Heyden. You may want to look that up. But let's look at the wording on this particular thing. The first slave owner in America was not only a black man, he went to court and demanded it. Now remember, and I'm asking you to look up John Punch, because he and two white indentured servants did a rebellion, and their punishment for John Punch was that he was to be made a permanent slave in the 1640s. So let's see what this says right here. In 1654, it was time for Anthony to release John Kaser, a black indentured servant. Instead, Anthony told Kaser he was extending his time. Kaser left and became employed by the free white man Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in the Northampton court in 1654. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Kaser indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for blacks to own a slave of their own race. Thus, Kaser became the first permanent slave and Johnson the first slave owner. Now let's understand something. We have to ask, how does a black man get the name Anthony Johnson? How does a black man, brothers and sisters, get the name John Kaser? John and Anthony, those names are not indigenous to, correct me if I'm wrong, African places. All right. So now when you're looking at this particular aspect, Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in the Northampton court in 1654. Who was the judge that this meme says gave judicial sanction? Who was the judge that okayed and was given sanction to Anthony Johnson? Now, this is something we want to point out for evidence purposes and edification purposes. Anthony Johnson in history died truthfully in 1670. The land that they had in the South was taken away from them by the court. Why did not this meme make that point? You understand? But they want to promote a lie that says Anthony Johnson, a pioneer of American slavery. How can that be when people are being named the names of their captors? And remember to look up John Punch. Want a hint? Go to a book, brothers and sisters, called Slavery and the Making of America by Horton and Horton, and you can begin to see where this evidence is being recorded at. Next slide. Let's go on. The Matter of the United States, Part 5. John Winthrop in the 1640s had blacks as slaves. He was the governor of Massachusetts. So John Winthrop was one of the governors in part of the United States, or what later became the United States. It was a colony then. What are they talking about when they're saying that Anthony Johnson was the pioneer of American slavery? John Winthrop had him beat a decade or so before that. George Yardley had blacks as slaves in the 1620s. He was the deputy governor of Virginia. Brothers and sisters, you may want to look up George Yardley and the aspect of what happened with John Wolfe in the Dutch Man of War with Jamestown, Virginia. Want a hint? Go to a book called A History of the American People by Paul Johnson, and you can begin to see what that is talking about. The presidents who had blacks as slaves were Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Johnson, and Grant. The wife of Lincoln came from a slave-holding family, and he, Lincoln, fired Fremont for freeing black people. A guy named Fremont freed black people, and Lincoln put them back in slavery and fired Fremont. The wife of Abraham Lincoln was a woman named Mary Lincoln. She came from a slave-holding family, and they were not happy with the concept and the ideology of black people being free. We're going to explain about the Civil War as this PowerPoint goes on. Abraham Lincoln, despite what memes may state, was not a black man. Abraham Lincoln was not a black man. The pictures that date to the 1860s of Abraham Lincoln as a black man was made by white supremacists who wanted to make fun of Abraham Lincoln, essentially saying that he was a lover of black people. His wife was white. His children were what you call pure white. So this is something we want to show for edification purposes. Next slide. The timing of the colonies. New York, 1664. North Carolina, 1653. Delaware, 1638. South Carolina, 1663. Georgia, 1732. Massachusetts, 1630. New Hampshire, 1638. Rhode Island, 1636. Pennsylvania, 1681. New Jersey, 1664. Virginia, 1607. Connecticut, 1636. Maryland, 1638. Now, note where I'm putting this right here, right? This becomes important. Sorry about the up and down on the PowerPoint. This becomes important with 1681, brothers and sisters, because Pennsylvania had black people recorded as cutting trees and building houses in 1684. The North was okay with slavery, is the point in that. Next slide. The matter of blacks who could read. Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, and Nat Turner all knew how to read, and they were a problem to their oppressors. Knowing how to read was a crime for black people in the South. Now, I want to get a little personal. Me having, as a child, been a former thief, I'm not a thief anymore as a grown man, thank the Creator. You understand? But when I was a child, I was a thief. And I remember having to try to cover my tracks and remember, oh, if my mother is looking upset, then maybe she knew I stole something. And maybe if she investigates something, she might find something out. That's called having a guilty conscience. The fact that they did not want black people to investigate and search something out shows you that they knew something they didn't want black people to know. And that's the point in that. So let's go on and see what this says here.
It appears from the scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and that God would come to their aid.
Pay attention.
This is taken from a book entitled The Negro in the United States by Fraser. It appears from the scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and that God would come to their aid. Turner was a mystic who had found in reading the Bible what he regarded as a solution to the problem of Negro slavery.
I wanted that to have been stated and read coming from a source cited in that particular part, so that way we can gain understanding for edification purposes. When it says Turner, it's talking about Nat Turner. He knew how to read. Demar Vizi and Gabriel Prosser all knew how to read. Our people who knew how to read wanted to rebel. Let's go on to the next slide. Matters of slavery in other places / aspects. The first slave ship left from Spain. We're talking in the 1440s. In 1440, the Portuguese set off the slave trade, which lasted until 1888. Some people say 1441. The number given as 12 to 15 million is not the correct number. The Portuguese in 1891 destroyed their slave records. All right, that comes from a book called History of Slavery by Susan Everett. That's when you read about the Portuguese destroying their slave records in 1891. In 1537, there were 4,000 blacks shipped to Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico yearly. In the 1620s, there were over 15,000 blacks shipped to Brazil by the Dutch. In the 1760s, England at 53,000 a year, French at 23,000 a year, Dutch at 11,000 a year, and Danes at 1,250 a year. And as stated, these included men, women, and children. The majority of the people on the ships were men. The majority of the age range of the people was between the ages of 18 and 25. Of course, there were elders, and of course, there were children. But the average age, I'm speaking as an average, all right, was between the age of 18 and 25. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Matter of slavery in other places. The Portuguese brought blacks as slaves to Europe in the 15th century. The Spanish brought blacks across the Atlantic going west. The Spanish used what is referred to as the asiento issued to them to trade slaves, quote unquote, legally. Now, regarding what is referred to as the asiento, which is the Spanish word meaning seat, you may want to sit there and look up Bartolome de las Casas. You may want to look up Charles, King of Spain. You may want to look up the aspect of what happened when they was given legal status, not righteous status, but legal status to trade black people as slaves. All right? The Spanish were heavily involved in that. Now, the guy we spoke of earlier, John Hawkins, was a person who used the asiento to trade black people off as slaves. And he was working for Elizabeth, the Queen of England. And I say this in no disrespect, but people today are happy to see a biracial woman who says that she can pass off as a white woman marrying into the royal family of England, whose ties go back to the slave trade. What we're looking at here is a map, all right? It says Africa. One of the things we want to point out where the arrow is the Mediterranean Sea. Right here where the arrow is where the bulk of the house of Israel lived. When the Romans, which is not shown in this map here, came from Europe north over there, the Israelites fled into African places. They were not destroyed. 70 AD was not the destruction of the house of Israel. All right? You actually had Israelites since the time of the prophet Jeremiah living in Egypt in what they call Elephantine, which is by one of the cataracts of the Nile, going toward Sudan. All right? So you may want to look that up. So the Israelites, all right, why does that become important? Because of what it says here. Let's go back.
It appears from the scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and that God would come to their aid.
Now, the people saying since the era of slavery that they, as the Israelites, if it was illegal for them to know how to read, and they who knew how to read was promoting the idea to the Negroes enslaved, that they, as the Israelites, can throw off the yoke of slavery and that God will come to their aid. We want to point out that the conscious community today must be ran by some kind of Freemasonic Illuminati kind of thing, because to be atheist or to promote the concept of there being no God or to say you don't need the Bible is all coming from the United States government. The Bible was banned in public schools in 1963. All right. So the point I want to emphasize in that particular regard is that the so-called conscious community bashing the Bible, which, mind you, when you look at this right here, Ethiopia, which is over in this vicinity right here, all right, is the first country mentioned in the Bible. The Bible says that Ethiopia has good gold. A lot of people also know that the best coffee comes out of Ethiopia. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Now, before they built in the 1860s the Suez Canal, and everything like that, this was all known as one landmass. All right, so we just want to point that out for reason and purposes. This was all known as one landmass. All right, so you had the Israelites that traveled this way, the Egyptians that traveled up this way. All right, for instance, Necho Wahemre or Necho II of the 26th dynasty of Egypt, he had to go through where the Israelites was at in order to get to this area way over here where Syria was at to try to fight against the Babylonians. All right, and in the process, unfortunately, Josiah, king of Judah, was assassinated. So the point I want to emphasize, brothers and sisters, in this particular regard, is that the people went back and forth. Now, I want to end off this particular regard by speaking of the Elephantine papyri that speak of the temple of Yahoo and of the Israelites that lived in Elephantine Egypt. That's there. You can look that up by looking up Elephantine papyri and temple of Yahoo. All right, that dating to the era of when the Persians was ruling. Yet they were not Persian people that we're talking about that was in Egypt with the temple of Yahoo. Then when you go over here, you find that there's a stele of Ramses in the land of Israel, which was formerly known as the land of Canaan. The Canaanites, brothers and sisters, were by default Africans. So the original inhabitants of the Holy Land were people that you would say are Africans, not Europeans. So we have to begin to see that this new conscious community that seemed to sprung up out of nowhere must be orchestrated by something that just seems weird and odd and, peculiar. You know? Wonder who's paying who. What do I mean by that? I had a job, all right? I want to get a little personal in this particular regard. I had a job, right, in which the porters, I'm not going to mention where because I don't want to get nobody in trouble or written up or, or anything of that sort. The porters used to pay us, the security, to do their job by giving us free lunches, by giving us movie tickets, by sometimes just giving us cash. Some of the security guards went in an hour early to mop the floor while the porters all sat there and watched TV and do whatever. Because that security guard knew that the porters was going to give them a good lunch later. So the security saved a lot of their own money in New York. I'm not going to disclose the exact location, okay? For protection purposes, if you will. But the point I'm emphasizing on is these security guards, which included myself, gave up their own personal time and did somebody else's job for movie tickets, lunch, and money. Now, what's the point of me mentioning that? Why is the conscious community saying that as you see this here, all right, Madagascar is connected to the continent of Africa, yet it's an island to itself, but the people in there are as black as the people here. Okay? So why, if we know the original inhabitants of this land up here where the arrow is, were deemed in layman terms Africans, thus making this land, because remember we spoke about the Suez Canal dividing the Sinai, all right? Brothers and sisters, wouldn't they by default also be deemed as Africans? Because when the Romans saw the Israelites, long after the Canaanites' existence in the land of Canaan, when the Romans saw the Israelites, the Romans said they believed the Israelites to be a people of the Ethiopian race. Ethiopia was all this land mass by the Greeks. That's why you see here the Ethiopian Sea. This is part of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is not an indigenous African word. It's a European word. So this is something we want to keep on emphasizing for edification purposes. All right? Let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. Sugar, cotton, and the Brazil matter. The plantation system demanded that blacks be brought from Africa to work on the sugar to be sent to Europe and for the cotton to be sent to India. Okay, so now the cotton to be sent to India. This is from about East India. You know, the one that's by China, the one that's like south of Afghanistan and all of that area right there. The slave trade, the people picking cotton in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, North, and so forth, they used to take that in heaps and sent it way as far as the Central Asia. So the Atlantic slave trade benefited different parts of the world, except for our people. White laborers cannot endure what the blacks could during the cotton and sugar era of slavery. Brazilians' appetite for black slaves caused over 8,000 a year to be brought to Brazil. The slave trade ended in the majority of the West Indies in the 1830s. Yet in Brazil, it continued until the 1880s. Brothers and sisters, did you know that Mississippi was not deemed a free state till after 1980? After 1990? Mississippi did not give over the papers for them to be deemed a free state until the year 2013. Did you know that? This is a part of the United States history that cannot be denied, that cannot sit there and just try to be swept under the rug by saying, well, there were black people here first. There's black people all over the earth first. There was black people in Germany first, but Hitler wasn't one, and he was ruling there. So trying to pick out, well, there was black people here and there was black people there does not mean that was the origin of those black people. This is what we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Louisiana in a matter of slaves from Africa. Louisiana was never a colony and became a state in 1812. Some say 1811. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 expanded the territory of the United States. The later aspect of the American-Mexican War in 1848 expanded the United States even further. The matter with slavery was they, the whites, wanted it expanded west, while some wanted it only in the South. Let's understand that. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 eventually led to the matter called Bloody Kansas, in which whites attacked whites for not wanting slavery to expand. The reason why the Civil War started was due to the fact the South wanted to maintain and spread slavery going west, and the North, however, wanted to have the white boys going west for jobs and land. So essentially, here's what it is. The northern white males did not want slavery going west because that would have taken their jobs, because the slaves would have been taking their jobs, if you will. You understand? Slavery was the cornerstone of the Republican edifice of the South. That was said by the governor of South Carolina in the 1800s. Brothers and sisters, what we want to point out for edification purposes is that there is no scholar that is denying the existence of the slave trade. That is being sprung by New Age, Illuminati orientated. I'm not going to say Illuminati paid because I can't prove where your money coming from, but Illuminati orientated people who try to say essentially that Eve was wrong in the Bible because she essentially wanted to know about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's one thing, brothers and sisters, to want to know something. It's another thing, brothers and sisters, to try to investigate something that does not belong to you. Since we're speaking in regards of the Bible, and Eve was not the creator of the knowledge of good and evil, trying to investigate that was something that should have not been done. Trying to find out, for instance, the knowledge of evil. I don't want to know how a drug dealer sleeps at night. That's evil. I don't want to know how you're comfortable doing that. I don't want to know how syphilis is or how HIV is or how chlamydia is. That's knowledge, but it's the knowledge of something that's evil. So, this is what we want to point out. Next slide. Louisiana and the slave trade. Louisiana was first operated like Florida by the Spanish. Eventually, it became a state, and several years before such, Louisiana told the United States she will continue to import blacks from Africa as slaves. When Congress in the 19th century banned the slave trade, Louisiana told the United States, you can go ahead with that. Essentially, in layman terms, you'll miss me with that. I am going to get these niggas out of Africa. That is essentially what Louisiana told the United States. Rawley, in his book Transatlantic Slave Trade, stated that many of the slaves in Louisiana were there from the West Indies. We must remember that Louisiana was named after Louis XIV, and by the era of Louis XVI, they had the French Revolution. Now, regarding Louis XIV, you may want to look up the Black Code laws of slavery. Look that up. Louis XIV and the Black Code laws of slavery and see what you run into. Next slide. Brief aspect of migration. Many blacks taken to places such as Louisiana, Mississippi, eventually migrated to places like Illinois and Missouri. Many blacks taken to places such as North Carolina and Georgia eventually migrated to places like New York and New Jersey. Many blacks taken to places such as Alabama eventually migrated to places such as California. Many blacks taken to places such as Jamaica and Trinidad eventually migrated to places such as Panama, then Honduras. It is said Panamanians are Jamaicans who speak Spanish. So this is just something we want to point out for reason and purposes. The matter of the Maroons. In the history of black people as slaves in the Western Hemisphere, some, as in the case in Brazil and Jamaica, they took to the mountains and formed communities to rebel against the enslavement. In Brazil, one place was Palmares. In Jamaica, one place was Trelawney. As the Dutch and Portuguese fought in Brazil, the blacks fought for freedom. As the English and Spanish fought in Jamaica, the blacks fought for freedom. In the time when the French Revolution occurred, the blacks in Haiti fought for freedom and became the first free place in the Western Hemisphere. Now, in light of showing the unification between the black men of America in America and the black men of the West Indies in the West Indies, we want to show brothers and sisters that there's no way that these new age movement videos that's coming out talking about West Indians are taking the things that African Americans have worked hard for. No. What black Americans, quote unquote, should do is learn electrical work, plumbing, and farming, and knowing how to work the land, for instance. What the black men from the West Indies need to learn, essentially, is how to survive within the city. So you have the country, though there are cities in the West Indies. The black man in North America, with his organizations, even going all the way back to the Marcus Garvey, who he himself was from Jamaica, and so forth and so on, we can learn from one another. The black man can take over the reggae industry, can take over the hip hop and rap industry. The black woman can take over the hair making industry, could take over the nail filing and nail and makeup industry. There's no reason why Haiti should have to sit there and keep on paying France. There's no reason why that white people are the ones holding the money in Barbados. There's no reason why that we as black people are very rich when we think about it in the United States, but we still have the aspect of an apartment living. Many people in the West Indies say black Americans don't buy houses. They inherited apartments from one generation to the next. So the concept and the understanding of ownership, black Americans can learn from that. And I only use the term black West Indian and black American for understanding purposes. I teach that we are the children of Israel, but that's not the main point of this presentation. Okay, now, In the time when the French Revolution occurred, blacks in Haiti fought for freedom and became the first free place in the Western Hemisphere. That goes back to the aspect of what happened with Toussaint Louverture and then later on Dessalines. African American and West Indian. We should know that George Washington in the 1760s traded our people as slaves from what is the United States today and the West Indies. In slavery, trading our people from Barbados in the 1640s was not uncommon. Many of the captives that were in Haiti went to what is Louisiana. The term African American can be traced to Jesse Jackson in the 1980s. Haiti, said to mean high mountain. Jamaica, from the word Samaha, said to mean rich in springs. Barbados, the Portuguese word for beard. Trinidad, the Spanish word for Trinity. So whether you so-called Trinidadian, Bayesian, Jamaican, Haitian, or African American, these names are not what our people were called before this particular situation here, which I'm going to scroll to. See this situation right here? There were no people that were coming out of there that were called Trinidadian, Haitian, Jamaican, African American, or Bayesian. No. You understand? So, these names were applied to us by our captors. I would like to read something out of the book that Nat Turner was reading from, that Gabriel Prosser was reading from, in Deuteronomy 28, verse 37. We see the following. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb and a byword among all the nations where the Lord shall lead thee. So, how did our great ancestors fall to a syphilis, herpes, smallpox, hunchback, used now a pump to sexually satisfy his women in the bedroom? How did our ancestors fall to that creature? If not the Most High, the Creator, gave our ancestors over to the hands of their enemies because we broke the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. This is why they did not want us talking about God in slavery. They did not want us talking about that. There were instances when black people would put their heads inside of pots so their prayers would not be heard by the slave master. So how is the New Age conscious community saying that black people was taught prayer and about God from the European? That's not even what the people like Dr. Clark taught, and he ain't even like the Bible. You understand? The ones who taught back in those colleges in the 70s and everything like that in the 80s, they were essentially saying that the concept of God is a black man's concept that the Europeans took, stole, and perverted. That's what they used to say. But now you got these internet so-called scholars who is not published, who cannot state their pedigree, who are they married? Are these people on some homosexual vibe? We're going to go in and talk about this kind of subject, brothers and sisters, because anytime somebody can tell you to marry a person and love is not needed, that's a fool. Exodus 21 speaks about the servant who says that he loves his wife. How are you going to have a marriage without love? That's straight foolishness. How are you going to listen to a man that's telling you to go and get a swab from out of your mouth or have them pluck out your hair so that white man can give you a number and then say, oh, this is where we think you come from in certain part of Africa? No. Spending your hard-earned money for the European man to sit there and give you a hypothesis on what he says he think you come from. Brothers and sisters, our awakening is spiritual, not physical. I state this again. Our awakening is spiritual, not physical. This is why the DNA tests show different results, because you're not going to get it through that way. That's not how the Most High is going to open one's eyes. One's eyes is going to be open, as it says in the book of Zechariah, not by might, but by the Spirit of the Most High, the Creator, the God that the Romans hated. You understand? Yod Hey Wah Hey, YHWH. You understand? He's the God that the Romans said is mean and cruel, you know, because in the laws of the Most High, homosexuals are put to death. There's no way in the world that Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, that says about having blood upon a sodomite, a man who, in layman terms, is a faggot, a homo, is what the Bible talks about in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13. Their blood shall be upon them. There's no way in the world that the scriptures, and I'm speaking mainly and only about the Old Testament, came from the European man. The so-called conscious community is unintelligent and doesn't understand the difference between culture and politics. You understand? Because if you understand the culture of the Old Testament, such as the death penalties that the house of Israel had, there's no way in the world that a Greek culture is promoting the death of homosexuals. No, brothers and sisters, the Greeks used to rape men. You understand? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Okay? Next slide. The matter of slavery here concluded. The point in going over the matter of slavery is actually to set the record straight on many aspects. We were brought here as captives and never is a captive made into a slave and going to be equal to his or her oppressor. Isaiah 14 in the Bible says Israel will rule over their oppressors, not mix with them. Brothers and sisters, the so-called conscious community getting all kinds of likes and everything like that. Got a man up there telling you that it is okay to get with a woman whose father is black and whose mother is white. The man said that's like the best option. That man is not promoting sisters with brothers. While you snap on a black woman's weave, you're taking shots at black women to say essentially that she's not worth the black man and that the black man is not worth her. These are the kind of foolishness stuff that's being taught as to why I make videos daily. Blessed be the Most High. This work cannot be slowed down. This work needs not be slowed down. You do not slow down the work of the Most High. You understand? I want to read something. And it's not to promote myself, because I've been guilty of this myself. But this is something when you're doing the work of the Most High, you want to continue it. You don't want it cease. You don't want it slow down. All right? Jeremiah chapter 48, verse 10. It says, "Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully, and cursed be he that keepeth back his sword from blood. Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully." Now in the Masoretic text, it says, "Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Most High with a slack hand." So most Israelites who are Old Testament based deal with the aspect of the Masoretic text. So let's take that breakdown and explanation. Cursed be he who doeth the work of the Most High with a slack hand. This is why I make videos every day as quickly and efficiently as possible. This will not be slowed down. You understand? Blessed be the Most High. As long as a brother has breath, knowledge, internet access, and able to use a computer, these teachings, blessed be the Most High, will continue. Let's go back to the slide in the beginning so we can see who name we came in so there will be no misunderstanding. Shalom, giving honor and praise to the Creator of heaven and earth, the Most High. That is whose name I come in. You understand? That is who I'm representing in this particular aspect. So, for edification purposes, brothers and sisters, all right, I just want that to be noted. So, there won't be no misunderstanding. All right? Why our people fell, how our people fell, and what to do to change our people, to cause them to be enlightened. This work, blessed be the Most High, will not be slowed down. As stated, as long as the brother has breath, is sane, my faculties, blessed be the Creator, are working, the internet is usable, and I have a computer that's working, blessed be the Father, we're going to continue in these teachings. It will not be slowed down. Jeremiah 46, verse 27. So we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. Jeremiah 46, verse 27. So we can see what the Most High said about those who oppress his people and why his people fell. But fear not thou, O my servant Jacob, and be not dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save thee from afar off, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. So the captivity of who? Afar off. We are far away from our land. The European Jews who went through their Holocaust was not far off from their land because they were the Germans and the people of Poland and all of that sort. That was their ethnicity. Judaism was their religion. Whereas once it came down to the true house of Israel, they were sent off far away from their land. All right? And the seed from the land of their captivity. Seed is a physical thing. The physical house of Israel will have a new spirit. I want to emphasize that. Because I don't want people to say, oh, he sounds contradictory. Because at first he said, the awakening is going to be spiritual. Yes, spiritual, by the Spirit of the Most High on the physical house of Israel. Let's go on. And Jacob shall return and be in rest and at ease, and none shall make him afraid. Fear thou not, O Jacob, my servant, saith the Most High, for I am with thee. For I will make a full end of all the nations, whether I have driven thee, but I will not make a full end of thee. This is why the government plans don't work. That's why those secret societies who hold meetings against our people and hold crafty converse, it doesn't work. Their plans don't work. You understand? The person who's addicted to crack gives birth to a son who becomes a lawyer. There are instances of like that within our communities. The curses that fell upon us still did not destroy us. The Most High said Israel will not be destroyed off the face of the earth. That includes the tribe of Dan still being in existence. Let's finish off. Jeremiah chapter 46. And we're going to conclude the last part of verse 28. But I will correct thee and measure, yet I will not leave thee wholly unpunished. So our people falling to the nations, it's our time to rise up. Shalom.